there was such a lack of safety and safety standards on that set that there were live rounds on set. They were mixed in with regular dummy rounds. Nobody was checking those, or at least they weren't checking them consistently. And then they somehow got loaded into a gun, handed off to Alec Baldwin. He didn't check it. He didn't do any of the things that he was supposed to do to make sure that he was safe or that anyone around him was safe. And then he pointed the gun at Helena Hutchins and he pulled the trigger. This was a really fast and loose set. Nobody was doing their job. There were 3 people that if they had done their job that day, this tragedy wouldn't have happened. If they had just done their basic duties, we wouldn't be standing here.
Now, it's time to pull back the curtain on the incident that's shaken the Hollywood film industry and made history in criminal court. CrimeCon, please welcome to the stage your hosts and panel guests. From Court TV, she's a former prosecutor, a trial expert, and host of the show Opening Statements with Julie Grant, weekday mornings on Court TV. Julie Grant. He's an Emmy Award-winning journalist, the host of the True Crime Deadline podcast, and Court TV's crime and justice correspondent, Matt Johnson. Julie and Matt are pleased to have 2 very special guests with them today. The attorney who represented defendant Hannah Gutierrez, criminal defense attorney Jason Bowles, and well-known Hollywood prop master, firearms expert, and the authority on movie set safety, Dutch Merrick.
I think we're going to trade.
Hi, everybody. Welcome.
Thank
it's
you
wonderful
for being
to
here.
see you all. Oh, my goodness. So our big overarching goal here is to answer all of the questions that you have and that we have, all of us trial watchers, after watching the case against armor Hannah Gutierrez Reed.
Absolutely, and these guys are such experts in their field. And then, of course, you saw him on Court TV over there representing the other half of what this trial is. So, really talk to us about who do we think should be charged in this? Jason?
Well, okay, let me start by saying my view was nobody should have been charged. I thought it was a tragic accident, and I thought there was a series of things that many people did causing the accident. If you are going to charge somebody, my thought was always you got to charge everybody. And that's what OSHA found. That's what they thought, that the production was the ones that caused the safety problems on set. So to single out Hannah Gutierrez Reed, in my mind, was an absolute travesty. And that clip that was played still gets me worked up. Because the DA got it wrong. She got it wrong from the first part, and they just targeted Hannah because she had no resources. They thought no ability to fight back, and that's why they went after her. And now Baldwin, the reason why they're going after him is he's the big fish, so they can get a big conviction. That's my personal view.
No, appreciate it, Jason. I could hear you back there, the reaction. You let out quite a sigh when you saw that video roll.
I still am not happy. If you look at it, okay, this set was caused, and it was a loose safety atmosphere from the get-go. A number of failures on it, but that was not all on the part of one person. We had the government's experts say there should have been multiple armorers, and I think Dutch could speak to that. There shouldn't have been one armorer, 24-year-old female, first time on a set, second time she's ever done this, and they're going to put it all on her, the responsibility. 21 guns. She's going to do prop duties, and then she's also going to do armorer duties, and then when something goes wrong, they're going to blame her. It's really convenient. And so I think that's what happened.
And this is so great to kind of pull back the curtain on this, talk about the way it happened and the way it should have gone, right? Which is why, we're tapping into the areas of expertise that you both have. Dutch Merrick is the go-to guy in the Hollywood film industry when it comes to firearm expertise. He's a prop master and an armorer. He is a former competitive shooter, a speed shooter, before he got into the Hollywood industry. And I remember when this case first broke, and Matt and we were saying, okay, we got to get the most leading expert in the industry and see what he says should have happened. That led us to Dutch Merrick. So, Dutch, talk to us about how it should have gone, because we've heard that things were very sloppy. All of you who watched the trial, you know that things were very sloppy, very disorganized on the set. It was done on a very low budget, as we came to learn, and there seemed to not be enough resources and people to do the jobs. How should things have gone in that incident in question?
Well, this is definitely a chain of events. It's not one single thing, but it was a lot of things that compiled to cause this to happen. You start at the very beginning was how they budgeted the show. They budgeted the show very small. They did inadequate hiring. There are several people that went up for the job of prop master or armor that were interviewed, and they said, okay, we need 6 weeks of prep, and we need 6 people in the department. But instead, they found brand new people that would do it with just 3 people in the department, and one of them was just a part-time armorer. She wasn't even doing that full-time, which is amazing to me. And they didn't vet their background. Had they checked with the one show that Hannah Gutierrez Reed had done before, they would have found out there were already 2 negligent discharges on her very first show doing that. And they might have thought twice about hiring her to do this show with this A-list actor. The procedures that day, remember the camera crew walked off that morning. The conditions were so bad that the camera crew walked off. And in my experience, a camera crew will stick with a show until the very end. They ride the ship out. They're dedicated to their craft. For them to leave means there was a lot of challenges on that show. So that morning of the shooting was mayhem. There was certain disarray. Now you've got this young gal under stress, and they have her loading the gun as she's walking to set, loading it with dummies that she's supposed to be checking one at a time, and she's listening on the walkie, and they're calling for her, and she hands it to the first AD, who inserted himself in the process. I've never heard of that. The first assistant director is there to be a second set of eyes as an overarching safety officer, but they don't handle the gun. They don't set the time bomb. They don't pour the gasoline on the stunt man. They don't rig anything. They're like the conductor in an orchestra. They bring in the strings and the bass, everything on time, but they don't play an instrument themselves.
That's a good analogy.
So this guy, Dave Halls, takes the gun from her, sends her out of the room, so it's not even under her supervision. Oh, because of COVID. We have too many people in here, you got to go. It's the last person you want to have leave the room when there's a prop gun in the set is the person responsible for the prop gun.
Right.
So Dave Halls continues to do the rehearsal with the gun, to do a blocking, and then he calls in Alec Baldwin and says, here you go, sir, here your gun, it's safe, it's cold. So Alec Baldwin put his faith in the first AD and presumably armor that the gun was safe and ready to go. And keep in mind, never in Hollywood history in 125 years has there been live rounds accidentally found on a film set. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
So in his 40 years of acting with guns, the very worst thing he could have imagined that could happen is that if he did pull the trigger on this gun, it would probably go click, and the worst thing would be a firecracker. It would be a blank inside. That's the worst. So the thought that there was a live round is just unimaginable for him.
And in an abbreviated version, show us, because we want to play a clip that you provided for us. Give us a little demonstration of the proper etiquette and what should have happened.
Sure. And I'm packing a green gun here, too, by the way.
It's green. You're safe. You're safe.
That's awesome.
So, they did have me bring a replica revolver, so we have a gun that
also
looks
been
like
checked out, safe.
This has been checked,
You can't even fire anything.
So what we'll do is we're going to consider this our direction of safety between the people on the stage and the people here, so I can point it safely anywhere here, and that's fine. I'm going to open the loading door, pointing it down, and Jason, why don't you be the first AD, you be the second set of eyes. So I'm going to pull the hammer back to half cock, which loosens up the cylinder, and I can shine a light in there with the door open, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we'll go to 7 just for good measure. That's empty. And then I've shown my actor. So I can show you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7. And it's an empty gun. Drop the hammer, and then you are now able to safely hold the gun, do whatever you want with it. And we all know, we got 2 sets of eyes, that this is inert and fine.
Right. And that never happened. That simple procedure, but a very crucial procedure, never occurred.
Correct. And I did bring with me a dummy round that has this looks like a regular bullet with the primer, the case, and the lead. But if you put it to your ear, us insiders, the actors and the armors, will know that it is a dummy because it has a BB in there instead.
I wonder if I get it close to my microphone if we can hear a rattle. Can you all hear that? Yeah. Oh, wow.
So I thought I had one of the BBs in my pocket. But yeah, so
but
just
it
a little
looks so
BB.
real.
On camera,
It really
looks
does. Doesn't this
like
look
a deadly object, but we know as
like a
filmmakers
round.
that it's safe. So we can work with these all days long. This is what Hannah Gutierrez Reed was supposed to have done, was checked each one with her ear, put them in the gun, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, under the supervision of the AD.
Right, Dutch.
So Jason, when you're listening to this, how is your client culpable or not culpable then?
I don't believe she is culpable on a criminal standard, on a recklessness standard, and that is a standard in the law. It's like a drunk driving as an example. If somebody gets drunk, he gets behind the wheel, harm somebody, that's a reckless standard. You knew you were drunk, you knew you were going to be driving, you knew you shouldn't have done it. The difference on a criminal standard is, did Hannah Gutierrez Reed know the round was live? So if she doesn't do that shaking and she doesn't do it properly, that's negligence. That's a civil standard, and she should be sued, as should Mr. Halls, who didn't do his part, as should potentially Mr. Baldwin, who pointed the weapon, the firearm, shouldn't say weapon, the firearm, at Ms. Hutchins. The difference is none of those people ever knew it was live, and none of them ever in a million years thought it could be live. If you don't have that knowledge, that's in the criminal case, you can't be criminally liable. So that is where I think the distinction was. That's where I think the jury instructions were incorrect, and that's why Hannah was convicted. That standard wasn't in there, which is in the case law. Now, that's going to be the center point of our appeal, is that the jury instructions were wrong, and so this is not a criminal offense. But it's definitely negligence. It's definitely sloppiness, as you said. It's definitely a set that wasn't run well, but it's not a criminal.
And Jason, might I just say, you did a masterful job defending this case on really tough facts, really tough facts to contend with, and a client that, to many of our trial watchers who would write in and comment, said they found not to be very likable. And I always say, never get mad at the defense attorneys. They're just doing their job. And you're somebody who's tried cases on both sides of the courtroom. You served as a prosecutor for a long time before you made the switch to doing criminal defense work, and it really showed. You were just the epitome of class and professionalism, and you left no stone unturned in terms of the legal issues to set things up for the appeal, which is happening now. And one issue, you could have on appeal has to do with how did those live rounds get on the set? And
to begin with.
Right. And I would love to know how many of you in the audience feel the way I do. After watching that trial, I don't think the state proved that she brought them on the set. I wasn't satisfied. Were all of you? Yeah. Do you agree? If you agree, applaud. Yeah. Something just doesn't smell right with it. There's something really fishy about that. What do you think? Yeah, go ahead, Dutch, please.
I was going to say, because I follow this very carefully, and the number that comes up to me that's important here is 6. They found 6 live rounds on that film set. Where else do you find the number 6 in an old Western revolver? There's 6 holes. So at some point, it's very likely that a gun loaded with 6 live rounds, maybe at practice, was unloaded into a box of dummies. And when the interviewers asked the prosecutor, when she was filing charges against Baldwin, what about the live rounds? Where did the live rounds come from? And the prosecutor said, that's a red herring. We're not looking into that. Everybody I know in Hollywood wants to know where live rounds ended up on a film set for the first time in 125 years. And the prosecutor doesn't care to know?
Big red flag. That's the red herring. That's the, red flag. Herring. Yeah. I can't believe she called it a red herring. That's, I mean.
Unconscionable.
It is unconscionable, yes. Jason.
So they call it a red herring. Okay, they don't test the live rounds on set for DNA or fingerprints. They blow that. They don't go back to Seth Kenney, to his place, primary supplier on set, for over a month to inspect his shop. They do find the ammo can from Thel Reed. Thel Reed said those live 45 Colt rounds came from him to Seth Kenney on another movie set, because they were training actors off that set.
Well, let's just show the audience you in action during this court TV trial there in New Mexico, and we'll get your response on the other side.
Okay.
Sarah was technically your employee of PDQ Props, correct?
Sure, she was the representative of PDQ for the Rust production.
And she's the one that called you right after the shooting incident. You all talked for 30 seconds to a minute. Is that right?
It was a very quick conversation, yes.
And your testimony under oath is that you did not tell her to throw any of those rounds away.
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay. But then she did throw them away.
I learned about that months later.
Okay. And did you know that guns had been transported from the cart? Did you?
No.
Did you tell her to do that?
No.
Okay. Did you train Sarah before she worked on Rust?
I did.
And you trained her in what? In gun safety or what?
Yeah, the basics of using blank adapted guns and blanks and dummy rounds on a set.
And I take it you never trained her to throw away dummy rounds after a scene.
Oh. Well, I don't recall that conversation or even indicating at what point you would want to throw away dummy rounds.
Because they're rented, right?
They are rented.
Oh.
You know, that looked
Good
like a hot
cross.
mess, his office, when we're looking at those pictures and those
Disgusting,
evidence
wasn't
photos.
it?
It's like it was the whirlwind had hit it, like a hurricane. I mean, I've never seen an office quite like it,
horrible.
especially when you're storing ammunition. I mean, and you have live ammunition, you have blanks, you have dummy.
How did he get a deal? He got a deal. He didn't serve time.
He never was charged. He never was implicated by the. They never even looked at the idea he could have been the person who introduced the live round.
Right.
And he's the main supplier.
And he was talking to law enforcement and prosecutors, guiding the investigation.
40,
That's a problem.
Over 40 calls with the lead investigator, which I called her on why are you talking to a guy who might be a suspect over 40 times? What could be the possible purpose for that? And he's kind of guiding you to Hannah. Meanwhile, Sarah Zachary early on says, I threw these rounds away. So why'd you do it? Well, we've done that in prior things when a set happens and we just throw them away. No, you don't, because they're worth money to somebody, to whoever bought them. So and then they're rounds that can be reused. So that was never answered. Now, one thing that's just come out that nobody knows yet, we may be filing a motion
Ooh,
on.
tell us. Break some news here, Jason Bowles.
Here we
Give us
go.
some scoop at CrimeCon.
It's we're going to be filing a motion. Troy Teskey was the cop in Bullhead City, Arizona, a friend of Dell's who had those reloaded live rounds that ended up going to Seth Kenney. During the trial and before, we had told the DA he has some from that same batch. Troy Teskey still has them. So if you get them and you test them, they could match up to the live rounds. You could connect where they came from.
Do you think Baldwin's team is going to do that?
I think they're going to do it because we've been talking about it. But here's what happened. Troy Teskey dropped those off to the sheriff after the trial had ended because they would never pick them up. They didn't want to find out the answer. The sheriff has still not told us, the DA has still not told us this happened, but we know it happened because I talked to Troy. So Baldwin, us, we're going to file a motion that they haven't turned over potentially critical evidence. See, here's the problem. This is why I get mad every time I see that. They don't want to know the answer. They don't want to know where the live rounds came from because it opens up a whole thing. Maybe there were multiple things going on here. Maybe it's not just Hannah and Baldwin who we have to go after. But it's too easy. We just clean it up with those two and call it a day.
I hear what you're saying, and I know you're appalled, Dutch. As you're hearing this, Seth Kenney, all of it, the choosing not to test potential evidence. What do you think as someone who's worked in Hollywood and knows how the process goes?
Absolutely insane. This dummy round probably costs about $5. So if you're on a film shoot and you got a cowboy walking around with a bunch of dummy rounds in his belt, 5, 10, 15, 20, you get about $75 or $100 worth of dummy rounds on him. And so Sarah Zachary testified that at the end of that, when the shooting happened, she called Seth Kenney for a minute, and then she went and she took dummy rounds out of the actors' guns and threw them away. And you, I think, asked in the trial, had you ever done that before? She goes, oh yeah. So when we're done with the scene, we just throw them away. Well, that is an asset to the production. Either they're rented and have to go back to somebody, or they cost somebody something. Now the FBI didn't do a thorough investigation on the live rounds they found, because the question of what type of gunpowder, what quantity of gunpowder, and really break down those elements, because then you can relate those to other rounds you found. But they didn't. They just pulled them apart and said, these are live. That's not enough. Yeah, they're live, but do they match these other rounds? And
Right.
Seth Kenney, this slick character, provided dummies, almost a month and a half later, provided dummy rounds and said, these are the dummy rounds in my kit, not those dummy rounds from Rust. Well, he provided the dummy rounds from the Rust. They may look different today, but he provided those. This is not evidence of anything, that you happen to have some different rounds in your facility. Mm-hmm. He's probably provided those rounds.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jason, how are we in a world where evidence is thrown away and that's okay?
It's called tampering of evidence. It's destruction of evidence. I mean, and early on, I asked the sheriff, well, obviously, if you're going to charge people, this has got to be charged, right? This is tampering with evidence, pretty clear. Never did, never happened. Seth Kenney is not charged. So whoever made that decision and why, early on, it was all focused on Hannah Gutierrez Reed, and that was it. I mean, the most clear crime in this whole case is the throwing away of evidence.
Right.
It's easy. Sarah Zachary, and I used to be a prosecutor like you, and you go in and the person admitted it. I did throw away those rounds. I can't explain it now as we sit here. I did call Seth Kenney right after the shooting, and all of a sudden I'm throwing away rounds, but I can't tell you why.
And she got a deal.
And she got a deal.
The police didn't even keep the trash from the film set. So she threw them in the trash can, as she said. The police didn't secure the trash and scour it for anything, which also, that just seems like, forensics 101.
Yeah.
Right.
They didn't secure that. They also didn't segregate witnesses. So you have Baldwin talking to Mr. Hall, and they're in a little group. You have other people talking. The only person who was segregated was Hannah in the police car. And she's kind of hyperventilating, having an episode, and everybody else is talking. So then we get down 6-9 months later, and it's funny, people have similar stories. Wonder why that happened.
So I want to go back to something that I think is an important point that leads back to Seth Kenney and PDQ, is that in the industry, he knew Hannah Gutierrez's dad, Thel Reed, who is a very well-respected armor, speed shooter for many, many years in the industry. And rounds that were live, that were being used one day at the range, Dutch, correct me if I'm wrong, somehow Seth Kenney wound up with these live rounds that did belong to Hannah's dad, Thel. And so we know that at some point he takes possession of these. Where they go after that, I mean, good night. That mess of an office, I'll never forget. I laughed out loud at home as I was watching. You were on the host desk, and one of our analysts that comes on from time to time, her name is Marie Pereira, she said, I was waiting for Fred Sanford to walk down the hall in that filthy building, the way it looked. And I thought, yeah, it was just, how do you find anything? And so wouldn't there be a very easy way to find out through Thel Reed and through these rounds that were gathered by the gentleman you mentioned, Jason, who works in law enforcement, if in fact these are the rounds that were collected, because we know we have the spent casings that were collected, or the casing rather.
Absolutely, and that's what Thel Reed told the sheriff. I physically took these rounds from Troy Teskey. I had them in an ammo can. The ammo can went to Texas, to 1883. We did training of the actors off the set, Seth Kenney and I. He then took that ammo can.
Live fire training.
Live fire training. Live fire training off the set, not on the set. Seth Kenney then takes the ammo can back with him. He then comes back to New Mexico October 12th. So October 12th is 9 days before the shooting.
Right.
On October 12th, he said, I came back and I delivered another 45 long Colt dummy box. Well, he also had these live. So then you combine his office and how that looks with the idea that he's having to rush and put everything back together, and then it becomes at least circumstantial evidence that we know where these came from.
Right. And marry it to Dutch's theory about 6. What does the number 6 have significance with here?
It's probably a full cylinder of a revolver. If I can add to that and layer on the, now I'm blanking.
Oh, no, you're fine.
You're firing a blank?
Oh, well. Wow.
My dad joke.
That was.
You're so cute. That's right.
Never a misfire from you, Matt. So Seth Kenney, in his testimony, said that he had to provide dummies for Rust. He was called by Hannah, said, we need a box of 50 dummies. And he said it was a big challenge at that time because there was another show in town that had 5,000 dummy rounds. And they're like unobtainium. They're impossible to get because they've got 5,000 rounds. I can't in my wildest dreams imagine why any production would need 5,000 of these dummy rounds. The most I've ever had to use in a scene on a film, TV show is 300, and that was a lot. That means we had 6 boxes of ammo laid out, and our soldiers are loading magazines. 300 rounds is a ton. They're saying 5,000. So Seth Kenney, out of the goodness of his heart, gets this box of corroded old nasty dummies from another show, and he says he hand polishes each one. He's building a case that he's such a good guy, that he's so efficient, and he rattle checks each one, and only the best of them. And Sarah Zachary drives down from Santa Fe to Albuquerque an hour on her day off to pick up this magic box of unobtainium bullets, and this precious, precious thing that she takes back to the film set on her own time, and then she's throwing them away after a take like they're popcorn. So which Sarah Zachary are we talking to? Are they impossible to find, or are they so plentiful that you throw them away after a single take?
Excellent point, Dutch.
Sorry, that just stood out to me in the trial.
Oh, I love that you mentioned that. No, because it doesn't make sense.
It's a great point. I mean, why would she do
with
that?
all of that, I just think back to that one scene where he's like, let's go again, and you have Alec Baldwin, who's a producer on the show, who's going up on trial, and he's going to have to account for safety on the set, as well as being an actor, which is also, you're trained in safety. Dutch, you just touched on that. But don't you just love a defendant who loves to talk? I mean, are you with me on this? This is a guy that is in front of the camera all the time, so almost like a professional witness, right, Julie? When we're talking about Alec Baldwin.
Oh.
And really tries to set the stage by doing a lot of interviews.
I'm sure his lawyers are cringing with every statement.
And he says, like the biggest question on all of our mind, right, is did he pull the trigger? And we have a clip of an interview that he did. But first, I'm going to ask you gentlemen, did he pull the trigger? Jason, you first.
He had to either, if you listen to the experts, either pull the trigger or he had to have his finger depressed on the trigger when he cocked it and then let the hammer go. Now maybe Dutch knows better than I do, but if you don't have the pressure on that trigger, it's not going to fire.
Dutch.
So, and this is a loaded gun, if you will. There's more firearms puns than there are any other kind of pun, trust me, I know. So I recently had a chance to do a cowboy action shoot. So we had a chance to shoot. I haven't done a lot of competitions with these old Western guns before, so I had a chance to do it. And I had a chance to talk to the California state champion about how these work. And he goes, oh, I know exactly what happened with Baldwin. I said, what? Now, first of all, the FBI tested the firearm, and in the condition it was on that set, they said it was in perfect working order. So it would function as the manufacturer designed. Now, what this top shooter taught me about these Western guns, as you pull the hammer back, it sets the trigger like a little trap, like a mouse trap. As you pull the hammer back through the half cock and then through the rear cock, that trigger wants to pop forward. If Baldwin's finger was in the trigger well, just in front of the trigger, as he's pulling the hammer back, it wouldn't have given the trigger room to pop forward, and it wouldn't have set the trap. And so he could have pulled it all the way back with his finger not putting any tension on the trigger, and then let go of the hammer, and it would have gone forward. So that was a new revelation to me, and I tried it with the gun myself. Just rest your finger there. Don't even put any pressure on the trigger, but as you're cocking it, it prevents it from sort of setting that little trap.
Okay. Well, how about we remind the audience about what he exactly said? Let's play the clip from George Stephanopoulos with ABC.
Well, there are some who say you're never supposed to point a gun at anyone on a set, no matter what.
Unless the person is the cinematographer who's directing me where to point the gun for her camera angle. That's exactly what happened. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cock the gun. I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off. I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
Oh.
Dutch, when you hear his explanation, does it make sense to you?
Up until a few weeks ago, I thought he had to have been holding the trigger. And I watched the footage from an hour earlier during rehearsal where he pulls the gun out of the holster and he's got his finger in the trigger well the entire time. To me, in my mind's eye, that was enough evidence that he probably pulled the trigger. Knowing what I now know from this top Western shooter, I think it's quite possible his finger was just impeding the trigger, and it may not have actually pulled the trigger per se.
That makes sense. Something that Matt and I wanted to ask you about, and something we're curious about, I hope many of you in the audience are curious about this too. When you do filming, is what he said correct? Because there was some, he puts a little bit of blame on the victim here, on Helena Hutchins, the cinematographer who lost her life in that incident, when he says, well, I was being directed to, unless I was told to do that, where we know the number one rule of firearm safety, whether on a film set or in life, is never point a firearm at anything you don't intend to shoot. And when you do filming, do you use tricks so that you don't actually ever point it at someone?
Well, there are a lot of different tricks, and it's a really good question. And based on that video that you just showed, there's really two things to unpack. One, can you point a gun at another person? Two, was Helena involved in that process? So in real world shooting, when you're at the shooting range, police station, gun store, there's sacrosanct rules. And one of those is never pointed at a person. Some people voice it, you never point it at something you don't wish to destroy. However, have you ever seen a TV show or a film where there's a gun pointed right at the camera and you can see the cylinder and you see the thing fire? We do point it at things we don't wish to destroy. So, because we shoot blanks, we never put a lead bullet in the guns. There's no destructive power. And we can put a piece of bulletproof polycarbonate or Lexan in front of the camera. We can put that between actors. There are physical ways to point at something. Most of the time, we can cheat the gun angle. We cheat it slightly toward the camera. And I don't actually have to point at you. I can point slightly toward the camera, and it'll look fine for the camera. We can even go so far as staggering people. So people are a foot or two apart. One person's pointing this way, another person's pointing that way, and the camera compresses that into a flat plane. So that's the physics of that. So I teach a class every month in LA called Prop Gun Set Safety, and we go through the processes of basic firearm safety and handling the gun on a film set, and then do exercises doing blank fire in front of a camera. And then we break down the Rust tragedy. We spend about an hour going over all the elements that led to the Rust tragedy. And after I do that, I have a blank dry erase board, and I say, okay, now I've got a room full of film professionals, and they've just learned all this information, and I say, okay, Rust, who's to blame? And I go up to the board and I said, I need names. And film professionals will offer me, and I don't let them stop before they get to 10 names. I think the record we have is 14 people that are responsible. It's not one person. So they'll tell me, well, it was the producer for hiring. Well, it was the actor because he pointed the gun at somebody. Well, it was the armorer because she loaded it. It was the key grips in charge of camera safety. So it's not a simple matter.
Yeah, Jason, you're nodding your head, and I'm also wondering, this is a little bit off script, but did you depose Baldwin? Do you think he's going to take the stand? Is he different in person?
I didn't depose him. He did call our office. He sounds just like he does on Saturday Night Live. the only thing I could think while he was talking, and I told him I couldn't talk without his lawyer. I do think he'll take the stand. I really believe that. I believe he is one of those people that thinks I need to tell my side. And
he already took the stand in front of the cameras on the sidewalk.
He did. So the risk now is not as great, and I think he'll probably take the stand.
Will she testify in his trial?
Well, Hannah has a Fifth Amendment privilege while her appeal's going on. She didn't testify at her trial. I understand the prosecutor now, after not offering her any kind of real plea deal, is going to try to force her to testify through an immunity, through conferring immunity on her after the fact. Which she
after
didn't
she's
do
behind bars.
Yeah. It is actually fairly shocking. And now she's trying to file a forced motion for Hannah to have use immunity and derivative use immunity, so she has to testify against Baldwin or in his trial. Doesn't mean she's going to testify against him, but in his trial.
That's news.
This is huge. I know, we're stunned right now. This is something that hasn't been reported. Jason, what would this mean then for her conviction?
Well, that's the real problem. So we have not had her talk because she exercised her Fifth Amendment right. This prosecutor uses everything anybody says against that person, twists it any way she can, so we didn't feel like it was a good decision. With a very seasoned prosecutor and a 26-year-old person. So now she's going to be forced to testify if the judge says that, and that impacts her case. It impacts Baldwin's case.
Right.
Wow.
And let me also say, Hannah was the only person in the case who was not offered that misdemeanor deal. That she offered Halls, she offered Baldwin, she gave Sarah a complete pass, Seth Kenney a complete pass. Hannah was literally the only person in the whole case who was a full felony. You're going to take felony manslaughter. I'm going to hit you for cocaine, allegedly bringing on set for a witness who, it wasn't even there. Cocaine wasn't even, they didn't have any cocaine. And I'm going to hit you with bringing a gun into a bar.
What was in the bag then, Jason?
I have no, I can speculate. It's creatine.
Oh, she's a weightlifter.
She's a weightlifter.
Yeah.
But, you know, who
Bodybuilding
knows?
going on, huh?
I mean, it's the government's burden of proof.
Yeah.
So it's not my job to filter out, you know, in the end, and they didn't have it. This was only designed to smear her any way they could, and then they charged her with bringing a gun into a bar, which they never charge in New Mexico. I mean, we're talking about the West. There's probably 100 people that bring a gun into a bar all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody
It's
gets
the Wild West in New Mexico.
It's the
I
Wild
lived
West.
there.
I mean, I don't think that charge has ever come up on the books, but it did in this case.
Wow. You're a great advocate for her, just as you
thank you.
creatine. You're good, Jason Bowles.
Thanks.
I want to pick your brain about something else pertaining to Alec Baldwin's case, something that I think could be very favorable for him at trial. Remember how he was charged, and then the prosecutors, I think, really embarrassed themselves in how they had to withdraw the indictment and then refile. And then in the process of retesting of that old firearm, you know, this thing's like a relic, apparently the FBI breaks it during the operability testing and has to reassemble it. And as I'm reading this, it's, you know, like my prosecutor brain's thinking, oh my, this is going to be a problem for the state. Do you agree, Jason?
Oh, I can 100% agree. Baldwin's now filed a motion on this. So the state is not supposed to destroy evidence until the defense has a chance to examine it. Well, the FBI would get him on the stand during trial, and he says, I told the sheriff this is likely to result in destroying it. She's like, go ahead, knock yourself out, do it. So he literally told me this is the first time he's ever taken a mallet to a firearm in his career. And I
First
said,
time.
First time. I said, why did you do that? He said, well, I've done it 9 times in practice or whatever he said, the FBI training, but I've never actually done this. But I did it, destroyed it, of course, and now Baldwin's team is saying, well, how do we know the original condition? How do we actually know that?
Right.
And how do we never get to inspect it? Which is a good point.
That's huge. Dutch, you're appalled at this. I'm looking at your face as you're hearing this.
I just want to embellish a little bit on what Jason's saying. So the FBI tested the gun, and that's their job to make sure. A lot of these Old West guns have been modified in some way to make them trick shooting. They call it slicking up, and it's basically filing down some parts so they can fire really fast. So they wanted to see if the gun had been modified. The gun was new in the box, okay, so it hadn't been modified. So when the FBI tested it, it worked fine. That was the first test. That's all you need to know. Is the gun been modified? Did it work as intended? That was it, full stop, done. What they did is called a drop test. And if I may, with our empty replica revolver, what happened in the Old West, this hammer sits on a round. There's a round in the chamber, and the firing pin's right on that round. So if a cowboy is riding along and his gun falls out of his holster and hits the ground, that would strike the hammer firing around. So they would do a drop test. When we approve guns for sale in the United States, they do a drop test to make sure if you drop it, it's not going to just go off. There was no need to do a drop test. So once they had the gun in the bench and they test fired and it's fine, then they took it to the next level and broke the gun. Okay, so it's no longer testable by the defense.
Right.
Then the prosecutor says, well, we fixed that problem. We have an expert come in and put new parts in it. Is it the way it was on the day of the death? It's not. It's got new parts in it, so they cannot be tested. So failure upon failure upon failure.
You're right.
And you start to scratch your head. Like, why would they do that?
That's the FBI. They're like the pinnacle of crime investigation in our country. Were. Sorry, past tense. Today's FBI.
Yeah, this is something, I think that's going to be very favorable, in my opinion, for Alec Baldwin going forward. And let's talk a little bit about his case now, because we're looking ahead to July. He, unfortunately for him, did not get a favorable ruling from the judge recently, as we reported in that motion to dismiss. So the case rolls on. July 9th is the date. Court TV is going to be filming it. We're going to be broadcasting everything, going to be there. Maybe he'll testify, as Jason said.
Yeah.
We're curious if you think he'll be convicted. So let's talk about that. Starting with a clip. This is from one of the interviews that he did in the interrogation room. Let's take a listen to some of what he said after the incident where his friend and colleague Helena Hutchins was killed.
This is all I know, and that is that I take the gun out in the rehearsal. He wants it very dramatic and very sort of kind of sneak up on them. I take the gun out, and as it clears, as the barrel clears, I turn and cock the gun over here. I turn and cock the gun goes off. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to be a cold gun. Nothing. No flash charges, nothing. Now, this is a puzzle to me. This is making me very emotional now, but I take the gun out slowly, I turn, I cock the pistol, bang, it goes off. She hits the ground. She goes down. He goes down, screaming.
I think it's pretty crazy that after one trial for one of the defendants, we're still asking the question, how did this happen? It really wasn't answered after her trial, at least in my view, watching it closely.
It really wasn't, and I think, it was a horrible tragedy, and if they really want to, one, have this not happen again or make changes that make it safer, and two, honor Helena Hutchins and her family, I think getting to the truth is extremely important. And we understand what happened and how to prevent that from happening in the future and what steps we can take to make these places safer. What has very much bothered me from day one is that the government has not cared about the truth. They have cared about convicting a couple of people, and like I said, calling it a day that justice has been served. Well, no, has it really been served? If we really didn't find out where the live rounds came from, if we really didn't hold everybody accountable who was accountable, if we really didn't find out exactly how everything broke down, is justice really served?
As we enter into the second trial here, in just a couple weeks away, explain to us recklessness and what he's facing and how he's culpable there, Alec Baldwin.
And I think, again, reckless standard is on a standard where somebody knowingly gets drunk and they knowingly get behind a wheel and they understand that the consequences of what they're doing can be catastrophic. Okay, that's a reckless standard. A negligent standard is you don't use due caution in your actions. So people can be negligent in everyday life all the time. Alec Baldwin, the question is, when he was doing that rehearsal and they're saying, point it here, does this look all right, does this look all right? And whatever happens with his finger and that hammer, and it's pointed at Helena, unfortunately, is that conduct reckless, not knowing whether there's a live round in that firearm? And probably having, over the course of his career, performed this same action and movement hundreds, if not thousands of times on movie sets. So is that a reckless act? And that's where I think he is, in my opinion, on a criminal, he's not guilty. He didn't commit a crime. As tragic as it all is, what he did was negligent, at most, because he shouldn't have pointed it towards Helena. We all know that. But he did not know it was loaded with a live round, just like Hannah didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You raise a really important legal point, Jason. How we all know we have different court systems in America to deal with different things. Sometimes the same incident will result in both criminal liability and civil liability. Your thoughts on Alec Baldwin as the executive producer as well on this set, does that have any bearing on the criminal case in your view?
That's a very good question, because that is a little more troubling, because OSHA did find that production was the people that really created a bad safety environment. Now, then the question is, who really ran that set day to day? And it's the director and the AD. Baldwin's really the actor. And he's not really the day-to-day on-set running it. I mean, Dutch probably knows that better than I do. But so, I mean, really, he's an executive producer, but there's probably 7 or 8 of them. And the guys running it day-to-day are the AD and the director. And they're the ones that should have stopped. When there's negligent discharges, October 16th, 5 days before, we're going to stop. Okay, everybody, we're going to slow it down. We're not going to have this happen. That didn't happen.
Dutch, is there anything that you wanted to add to that when you're hearing that?
100%. I've heard from person after person saying, well, Baldwin's at fault, even if not because he's the actor with his finger on the trigger, he's executive producer, he's at fault. Okay, that's people outside the business. People inside the business understand that his role as executive producer was a creative producer. He helped get funding for the film and distribution for the film, and then as soon as that camera starts rolling, he's what we call number one on the call sheet. He's embedded in that character, he's acting, he's there to emote and think about everything about that character. Probably for weeks or months in advance, he's been thinking about that role, studying that character. He doesn't care if the coffee's hot, he doesn't care if the caterer is not on time. That's the unit production manager and the producer who both had noticed from the camera crew before they walked off that this is a dangerous set and we want changes made or we're leaving. That goes to the unit production manager, producer, all the production team, not Alec Baldwin. He is being that character.
Appreciate this.
Are you familiar with the Swiss cheese model of accident causation? Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
So I discovered this. My mom's an airline pilot, and so I follow airline industry stuff and accident investigations quite closely. There's a guy that came up with this model called the Swiss cheese model of accident causations. If you take a block of Swiss cheese and you slice it, the holes are in a certain spot, and the next slice, the holes are in a different spot, and the next slice, and so on. So if you stack up these slices, each one of these is a layer of defense that's got some holes where something might slip through. So in the case of aviation, it's the design of the airplane, and then it's the building of the airplane, and then it's the flying of the airplane, and the maintenance of the airplane, and so on. All of those things, there may be some holes, but nothing's going to get all the way through. Light will never get all the way through and cause an accident. But at some point, those holes line up and something makes its way all the way through. So the hiring practices, the vetting of the armorer, and the entire prop department were all brand new. There was no seasoned veteran in that department to say, hey, look out. The actor, the AD, the ammo provider, all of these people, all the holes lined up perfectly so that shot went right through the Swiss cheese and all the defenses were mitigated.
That's a great comparison, and I thought you put it better than anyone when you were analyzing this case for us, and you said there was a cascade of failures. It wasn't just one thing. It was numerous things that unfortunately went wrong and caused Helena Hutchins to lose her life, and we're certainly mindful that she is the victim. She's what this case is about. And as we get ready to proceed to trial number 2 for defendant Alec Baldwin, we have a little preview we put together for all of you from Court TV. Let's take a look now. Breaking news. Police are saying that actor Alec Baldwin fired a prop gun, killing a cinematographer, 42-year-old Helena Hutchins.
She was one of those rare individuals that had an absolute infectious personality.
A-list actor Alec Baldwin is cast in the real-life role he never wanted, indicted involuntary manslaughter, criminal defendant.
His lack of gun safety inside that church is something that he's going to have to answer for.
I never once said, never, that the gun went off in my hand automatically.
I turn and cock the gun goes off.
He keeps talking, and he is digging himself deeper and deeper.
Is there an actor's exemption from liability when they're handling a deadly firearm?
It's the trial that's putting celebrity and culpability under a microscope.
We heard that this was a toxic set.
One more. Right away. Let's reload.
Make no mistake about it. There are defenses here.
He's not supposed to check the gun, clear the gun, so it's not his fault. He did nothing wrong here.
As Alec Baldwin goes from facing the camera
To facing a jury.
The Alec Baldwin manslaughter trial. Live coverage coming this July, only on Court TV.
I have chills just waiting. This is going to be unlike many of the trials that we cover, right, Julie? You know, one of the factors is the celebrity factor. We all know that. So, Jason, my question to you. Is there going to be a Hollywood presence in the courtroom there? Was there with your client? What can we expect?
I imagine there will be in Baldwin's trial. His family, possibly. I think there could be supporters. There's going to be a Hollywood presence, I believe, in his trial. It's going to be different.